and thanks for joining us for a new season of Law in the Library. My name is Robert Reeders, a librarian at the Headquarters Library in Gainesville. The Alachua County Library District and Three Rivers Legal Services have partnered for over 10 years on the Law in the Library series. Today's presentation is on driver's license suspension and reinstatement, presented by Samantha Howell, the Pro Bono Director for Three Rivers Legal Services. Ms. Howell earned her law degree from the University of Albany, and her areas of focus include nonprofit work, poverty law, domestic violence and women's rights, prisoners' rights, civil rights and civil liberties, social justice issues, public benefits, volunteer recruitment and management, program development, pro bono program development and management, event planning, and remote supervision. And now I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Robert. It's a pleasure to be doing this with you again this year, and I'm very excited to present on this topic. My name is Samantha Howell. I'm the Pro Bono Director at Three Rivers Legal Services. I am based in Gainesville, out of our Gainesville office. Three Rivers Legal Services is a nonprofit law firm that provides free legal assistance to low-income Floridians across 17 counties in northeastern Florida. We have offices in Gainesville, Lake City, Fernandina Beach, and Jacksonville. All of our services are free, and people can learn more about our services at trls.org. So I'm going to jump into this presentation, and I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And you might be wondering, gosh, why are we doing a whole presentation on that? And the reason is it's really complicated. It's very hard for individuals to find all of the things that they need to know in order to get a driver's license reinstated in Florida. In fact, there's not a single place you can go to get all of that information. You have to go to many different places. So I'm going to start with a little overview about suspension and then get into some of the details about reinstatement. So the first question, of course, is why is my license suspended? And in Florida, there's about 25 different things that can result in a license suspension. You can also have your license suspended before you are ever licensed, so before you turn 16. You can have your license suspended even if you've never been issued a license and you're in your 60s. It's a suspension of the driving privilege, not the actual card, so to speak. But some of the number one reasons why a license can be suspended have to do with unpaid court costs. And these are not necessarily court costs that are associated with a driving related infraction or a case, a court case. There have been suspensions in the past in some counties in Florida for failure to pay court costs related to, say, a municipal ordinance violation, like open container, or not having your pet on a leash. So that is one thing that happens, is unpaid court costs. Unpaid child support can also result in a driver license suspension. So if you've been ordered to pay child support and you miss those payments, they can order a suspension of your license. Obviously, driving related infractions or criminal cases like DUIs, failing to maintain your automobile insurance, things like that can also result in driver license suspensions. If you're in an accident and you don't have adequate insurance, it can affect your license. You can also get a suspension for points, and that has to do with the citations. So these are non-criminal cases. These are just your traffic tickets. But sometimes those cases result in points. And if you get too many points in certain periods of time, your license can be suspended. If you get too many types of certain cases within a certain period of time, your license can be suspended. This is frequently referred to as an HTO, or habitual traffic offender suspension. It is a 5-year suspension, and it generally results from 3 major infractions of specific kinds of cases. What I frequently see is either a DUI or driving on a suspended license, or 15 small infractions within a 3-year period. But once that happens, you're looking at a 5-year suspension. And then finally, there can be some non-driving related offenses. A couple notable ones, there's a couple drug offenses that could result in a suspension. Truancy, not going to school, can actually result in a loss of driving privileges. And you may wonder, why are you talking about this? Why do we care? And the truth is Florida has a very high number of driver license suspensions. As of a couple years ago, about 10% or around 2 million Floridians had a suspended driver's license. And that's important for a few reasons. One of them being about 75% of the state relies on private transportation to get to and from daily activities. So not having a license means not being able to go to school, to work, to the doctors, to see your children, to pick up your grandparents, to take your mom to the doctor, any number of things. And because even if you are able to access public transportation, it can be very limited, not only in where it goes, but also how long it takes to get there. I live about 30 miles outside of Gainesville. There's no public transportation to get to Gainesville. I'd have to take an Uber, and that would cost around $40, or a Lyft or some other type of rideshare. And that's about $40 one way. So the impact of not having a license is quite serious. So getting your license back actually requires a lot of steps. And so part of what I want to do with this presentation is really break it down into some very digestible steps that anybody can take to get their license back. And the steps you have to take have to do with why your license is suspended. So if your license is suspended because of a DUI, or you didn't have the right kind of insurance, or you have an unpaid court case, or you have a child support issue, there are going to be charges or fees that you will need to pay to the FLHSMV, which is the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles. I might call it DMV for short because that's what every other state calls their department. But Florida has the FLHSMV. So Florida does actually have a driver license check website where you can go and type in your driver's license number, and it will tell you what the suspensions are, if it's canceled, what it's for, but it doesn't give you all the information you need on how to get it back. So the first thing you're going to do is call them. And the FLHSMV has a whole bunch of numbers on their website, but you actually want to call your local tax collector's office. Now, the tax collector is who collects money on behalf of the FLHSMV. So if you need to pay fees, and if you have a suspended license, you will need to pay fees, you're going to go to the tax collector's office. You're not going to go to an FLHSMV office. The tax collector can actually see your driving record, and they can tell you what is holding your license. And that's kind of the term of art that I recommend using when you call. Clerks, court clerks, and the tax collector's office knows what that means. What is holding my license? That's the phrase I use. I mean, you can call and ask them, like, how do I get my license back? But I just kind of like, what is holding my license? What is keeping me from having my license? That's the first thing. And they're going to tell you all the things that are on your driving record that are going to affect your license. I'm going to go over these a little bit in a minute, but some examples would be, if your license was suspended, there's going to be a reinstatement fee. And that can be between, a relatively small amount all the way up to several $100s. There might be a replacement fee. For example, if your license was taken or lost and you need a new physical license, there is a replacement fee. If your license has expired or is getting ready to expire and you need to renew it, there is a renewal fee. You might be asked to complete a course or an exam, which may also have a fee. A course would be like the Advanced Driver Improvement course, or ADI course. It could be a basic driver safety course, or basic driver improvement BDI course. It might be a drug and alcohol course that you need to complete. The exams could be, maybe you have to take the written exam and the driving test because you never had a license. Your license was suspended because of truancy or because you were driving without a license, and so it was suspended. And so you actually have to take the standard test that anybody would have to take in order to get a license. So those are some of the costs that might be there. There's two that I'm also going to flag that do come up from time to time, and they're related generally to accidents and insurance issues. And so if you have an accident and you don't have adequate insurance to cover the costs, you might have to do what's called carry an FR44 or an SR22 policy. This can also follow a DUI, for example. And both of those they're not really insurance, they're more like certificates of assurance that you have certain coverages that are a little bit higher than what is required for the average driver, but is necessitated because of an accident or a DUI, and improper assurance. The FR44 insurance certificate has to be carried for 3 years from the date of reinstatement. So not from the date that your license was suspended, not from the date of the accident, but from the date that your license is reinstated. FR44 can be quite expensive. The average in Florida is several $1,000s a year. And a lot of places will actually ask for 6 months of that up front. So it can be pretty expensive. You do have to carry it for 3 years, but it is a requirement. The other type is the SR22 insurance certificate. This is less expensive. I've seen it from, about $100 to maybe a couple $100s for a year, but that needs to be carried for 3 years from the date of the license suspension. So if you don't have a license, and if your license is suspended and you do not try to get it back for 3 or 4 or 5 years, then that SR22 requirement can kind of become inactive. I think you still have to take a step to get it removed from your license, but you can't be driving during that time, obviously. So there are a few little things that are a little wonky. And then the other thing that I always like to kind of highlight is for any transaction with the tax collector, there's a $6.25 service fee. So whatever that suspension fee is, a reinstatement fee or replacement fee, there's an extra $6.25. Now, the other place that you would want to call to get your license back is the clerk of court in the county where your license was suspended. And this is going to be if you had a citation or a criminal case or a civil case that resulted in a traffic or in a license suspension. The tax collector, the DMV, can tell you if you have a citation that is affecting your license. And a citation is going to be typically a 6-digit alphanumeric set of numbers and letters. So it'll be like ABC 1, 2, 3. And that's the citation that was on like the traffic ticket that you got. So they can tell you that. They don't have the case number that the clerk of court is going to have. But that case number will include in the docket, in the history of that case, a copy of the citation that has the citation number you get. So there's a way to kind of cross-reference to make sure you have the right cases. But after you call the DMV and they tell you all of the things that you're going to have to do for them, then you also need to call the clerk of court in whichever county your cases are. And this, again, could be a civil traffic ticket, a CR, a TR case. So the case number might be 2024 TR 12345. It could be a criminal traffic case, a CT case. So 2024 CT 12345. It could also be a misdemeanor. So when you call the clerk, rather than saying, what are all my misdemeanors or what are my traffic tickets, you want to ask them, what is holding my license? Because it could be any number of things, and you want to make sure that that you capture everything. What the clerk can provide to you is the case number that is holding your license, the charges within that case number, and then the amounts of money owed. And here, the types of fees and costs that you're going to be looking at are going to be typically of a few different categories. One is going to be court cost. One is going to be a D6 suspension or a financial obligation fee, or CFO, criminal financial obligation fee. And that usually is going to tap out at maybe $50. Court costs can be several hundred. I think the lowest I've ever seen them is maybe around 60 or 70, 100 maybe. You could have late fees, And you can also have collection fees. Those are the most common. There might be a few other, but those are the most common. If you have a court case and you are told that you need to pay court costs and you don't pay them, after 90 days, the clerk can submit those costs to collections. And depending on which county you're in, that collection fee is generally going to be between 25 and 40% of the court cost. So if your court cost is $100 and you don't make a payment for 90 days, it might become $140 just because that's what the collection agency charges. So you'll want to ask for a breakdown of those fees because, again, depending on your county, you might have some options. In Alachua County, for example, you can request a conversion to community service for the court costs. It is calculated as 1 hour of community service per, right now, as of this recording, on August 30th, it's $12 an hour minimum wage. In September, it's going to go to $13 an hour. So depending on what the minimum wage is, for every amount you owe, you're going to do 1 hour of community service. So if you owe $130 and the minimum wage is $13, you can discharge that by doing 10 hours of community service. But it only applies to the court costs. So if there's late fees, D6 fees, collection fees, those are things that you would still have to pay in order to get that suspension lifted. In Alachua County, you also have the option of a payment plan. The payment plans are $25 per case. And I believe it caps out at a maximum of 2% of your income or $25 a month, I believe is what it is in Alachua County. But not every county does this. So you have to ask your clerk, what is holding my license? And then you might also want to ask them, can I do community service? Or how do I set up a payment plan? Now, one thing I do want to highlight here is there's also a program called Operation Greenlight, which happens statewide once a year in the spring, usually in late March or April. And during this time period, which varies by county, some counties it's a day or two, some counties it's a week. But during this time period, if you pay off the court costs and the late fees and the D6 fees or the suspension fees to the clerk, and your case has been in collections, that collection fee gets waived. And I've seen this have quite an impact for some folks. For example, I had a client who owed about $250 on a court case, but it was an older court case. And so the collection fee was about $450. So they were looking at about $700, but if they were able to pay the $250 during this week, that $450 was going to be forgiven. So it can have quite an impact. You can check your clerk's website early in the year. I would recommend in January or February, checking it regularly to see when Operation Greenlight is going to be scheduled. For the last 4 years or 5 years, it's been, like I said, in late March or early to mid-April. And typically it's scheduled in late January or February. So that gives you an idea of, if you do have a lot of court costs, or you just can't afford what you have and they've been in collections, if you can plan to pay those court fees, late fees, D6 fees during Operation Greenlight, that collection fee can be waived. So that is a very, helpful option for folks. But all that to say, when you call the clerk of court, what's holding my license, then try to get a breakdown of those fees, because it does impact payment plans, community service, and that Operation Greenlight. So you want to have a sense of what you actually owe. The last place that you would need to check with your license is the Department of Revenue. And this is going to be if you have unpaid child support. If you miss a child support payment, DOR can request a license suspension. But if you can set up a payment plan for any arrears and start making current payments, they can lift the suspension. And so that's just a matter of setting up a payment plan with DOR for any arrearage that is owed. It is important to note, however, if you miss another payment, they can resuspend it. And kind of on that line, I want people to understand too, in Florida, there is no maximum number of times that your license can be suspended at once. So you may have 15 suspensions on your license, and you have to take care of each and every one in order to get your license back. So if you have an unpaid child support suspension and a suspension because of a DUI and a suspension because you didn't have insurance, all three of those have to be cleared. And so it's really important that you check all of these places, especially if they apply to you. You may not have child support, but check with each of those to make sure that you have everything covered. The last thing I'll say about this slide is that if you call the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, they can tell you the county where you have citations or cases that are holding your license. So maybe you forgot that you got a speeding ticket in X county 5 years ago, and it's a suspension on your license, and you didn't know about it. They can tell you that, but Alachua clerk can't tell you about a ticket in Pasco. You're going to have to call the Pasco County clerk. So that's where that can become a little cumbersome. Similarly, if you have a license suspension from another state, Alachua County Clerk, Florida DMV cannot fix that for you. You have to contact the DMV in the state where the suspension is and clear that up before Florida will issue you a license. So that can be really challenging just from my experience in doing that. You should expect to be on hold for an average of 2 hours. I have been on hold for as long as 4. And I try to do this for clients because not everybody has a job where they can just be on hold for 4 hours. I can go back to typing and doing other stuff, but like it's really hard to just sit on hold for 4 hours in the middle of a work day. So this is where it's helpful sometimes if you can work with somebody, if you have a family friend who can help you. Sometimes they will need to talk to you personally, but sometimes if you have enough identifying information, somebody else could call on your behalf. But just know that if you have a suspension from another state, you might be on hold for several hours. And, you just kind of want to plan on that because, again, Florida cannot lift your suspension here until the other one is lifted. So some additional considerations that are important to keep in mind whenever you are working on clearing the suspensions on your license are, one, if you pay off too many traffic tickets all at once, you could actually end up with another suspension. So this is a points suspension. In Florida, if you get 12 points in 12 months, 18 points in 18 months, or 24 points in 36 months, your license is going to be suspended for another 30 days, 3 months, or a year. I believe it's 33 in a year. It might be 36 in a year. And this has actually come up for me once before. I was working with somebody who had 4 citations, each for speeding, I believe, and they were, depending on the speeding, it can be a criminal case or it can be a traffic case, and these were traffic cases, and they all carried 3 points. So if he had paid off, or she, I don't even remember, if the person had paid off all 4 of those tickets at once, they would have had 12 points, and their license would have been suspended for another month. So instead, what we talked about was paying 3 tickets and getting their, or paying 1 ticket now, 1 ticket, and spreading it out so that they're not doing the 12 in a month, the 12 in 12 months. So, it's just something to kind of keep in mind. The DMV on their website, they actually have a list of the most common citations that carry points and what those points are. And your points are generally 3 or 4 points. So if you know what your case is, you can actually go and figure out how many points you have. But it is, they say on your record up to 3 years. So it is a consideration depending on how many tickets you have, and whether or not they have points. As I mentioned, some counties allow you to convert court costs to community service. Some do not. So that is something you want to check with your clerk. In Alachua County, you can. There's actually somebody in community services, court services, who helps coordinate those community service efforts. but it does require a court order. So you do have to file a motion in order to do that. Sometimes the judge will have a hearing. Sometimes they will issue an order based off of the petition. Kind of depends on the situation. But in Alachua County, that is something you can do. You can also enter into a payment plan for court costs. This does not require a court order. It requires calling up the clerk's office and saying, I want to set up a payment plan. The cost for payment plans do vary by county, so you want to make sure you know how much that is before you get into it. I had somebody one time who wanted to do a payment plan, and they owed about $400, but just to set it up was going to cost about another $100 because they had 4 cases. And that might not make sense, but maybe it does. You know your situation the best, so you're in the best position to decide if it makes sense to just add that 25% increase onto your payments. The other thing that you might need to do is ask the court to withhold an adjudication. And what this is say, for example, you have 3 driving on a suspended license cases. Within a very short period of time, it can actually result in what's called an HTO, or habitual traffic offender suspension. But if you can get a withhold of adjudication on one of those, then you don't have basically a guilty on those 3 cases. And so it can help alleviate the pressure and prevent you from having that HTO suspension. This also can be done with a motion that goes to the court, but it does have to become a court order. So a judge does have to agree to do this. So those are just some considerations to keep in mind. Now, the last thing I have here is, if you have questions, what do I do? What do I do? Samantha, you just dumped a whole bunch of information on my plate. So you can call Three Rivers. Like I said, we do provide free legal services, and this is our intake number. So you would call and complete an application. You can also go to our website, which is trls.org, and complete an online application. And then it gets screened and moved through. And if we can assist you, we will. But if not, there's these resources here for you. You can call the FLHSMV, which, as I said, is really going to be your local county tax collector's office. You can contact the clerk of the court. And then if you want to check the status of your license, maybe you're not sure if it's suspended or revoked or canceled, you actually go to the flhsmv.gov. They have a driver's license check. If you use a search engine and you type in Florida driver license check, it should also pop up. When I do it, it's the first one. So those are some resources on how to get your license back, and some information on what causes suspensions and how you get those reinstatements. I hope this was helpful and informative, and I wish you the best of luck in that reinstatement process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for all that great information, and want to thank our audience for tuning in for today's presentation. And our next Law in the Library session will be on Wednesday, October 9th. And with that, I want to thank you and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.